Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, good. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And as always, Benum Christinet, I greet Christ in you. It's good to have you back and to see you all again. I'm sorry it's a little bit dark in here. I had a lamp issue, but I think by after the meditation, the sun will be on my side. So let's begin then this morning with our opening prayer and our first reading, and I'll go ahead and share that now. Okay. So I'm drawing again this morning on the psalm that we prayed last week as a way of kind of returning, kind of Lectio sense, to the theme that will pretty much dominate our readings today. And the first reading is rather long because I tell a little anecdotal story and have a brief comment on it, and wanted to kind of have the integrity of that state close together. And the second reading today will conclude our second chapter. So we're making progress. All right, so let us pray. So this is from Psalm 139. Where shall I go to escape your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? If I scale the heavens, you are there. If I lie flat in Sheol, there you are. If I speed away on the wings of the dawn, if I dwell beyond the ocean, even there your hand will be guiding me, your right hand holding me fast. I will say, let the darkness cover me, and the night wrap itself around me. Even darkness to you is not dark, and the night is as clear as the day. Amen. So our first reading this morning comes from the end of chapter 2, page 62, and spanning to 63 for those of you who have the text and would like to follow. So I recall a time several years back when my nephew was just a few years of age. Amid a large family gathering, he and I were engrossed in a game of hide and seek. When it was his turn to hide, he would consistently retreat to the most conspicuous of places, face down on the sofa, standing rigid behind a curtain, crouching beneath a slender floor lamp in the corner of the room. But regardless of his location, each of which he visited with monotonous tedium, there he would be, eyes closed, head in hands, under the endearing assumption that if he could not see us, we most certainly could not see him. And the room would fill with the exaggerated inquiries of mystified adults in their apparent search to uncover his location. Has anybody seen Ryan? I would call out. No, we haven't. Where could he be? Others would reply with feigned ignorance. Is he under here? I would inquire, lifting a teapot or placemat as if I might possibly find him there. The joy of this game for the adults was to relish in the beauty of his innocence. And in doing so, the masquerade often became a secret test of his patience. Predictably, within a matter of minutes, he would let out an impatient sigh, as if by making noise, we bewildered adults might actually catch a glimpse of him. Eyes now peering cautiously from behind ever-widening fingers, then quickly covering up again with a stifled giggle. Finally, when he could bear his self-imposed isolation no longer, he would jump to his feet, declaring, "Here I am," as the room would spontaneously erupt with the shouts and laughter of startled adults, slapping their foreheads and wondering out loud, how could we not have known? And almost as instantly as the cheers had settled would come his question and demand all at once. Again? So turning my back for an instant, my nephew would nervously scurry off to the couch, the curtains, the floor lamp, while I counted aloud, 1, 2, 3, and so the game would go on. The contemplative life is like that. We repeatedly attempt to hide from God, all the time secretly longing to be found. And when our self-imposed egoic isolation becomes too much for us to bear, we momentarily jump out from behind all that hides us and declare, "Here I am." But when the fanfare of my latest spiritual quest has died down, as inevitably it does, my childlike demand for attention insists on another round of hide and seek. Whether I run off to my career or frenetic activity or sex or alcohol or religion or power or money, all of them are glaringly conspicuous hiding spots for the divine. And so the many false starts to my contemplative practice begin anew. And with Adam and Eve, I still crouch in darkness, frightened, but secretly hoping to be found. So our second reading today concludes our second chapter, beginning on page 63. When we come to understand this relationship between exile and longing, we realize that Eden turns our understanding of revelation inside out. It is not God who remains hidden, as the psalmist laments, but we who are called to come out from the dark corners of the garden into the light of God, from whom we repeatedly attempt to hide, but in vain. Revelation consists in our own self-revelation to God, who is ever present and always in search of us. And here we return to our psalm. Where shall I go to escape your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? If I scale to the heavens, you are there. If I lie flat in Sheol, there you are. If I speed away on the wings of the dawn, if I dwell beyond the ocean, even there your hand will be guiding me, your right hand holding me fast. I will say, let the darkness cover me and the night wrap itself around me. For even darkness to you is not dark, and the night is as clear as the day. The transcendent God who, for this psalmist, is inescapably present throughout the universe, is the same God now intimately present in Christ, in whom the saga of our exile is to be finally and definitively ameliorated. Indeed, the gift of our divine longing can come about only because God already knows where we are hiding. What mystics have always known, even if some in the church have too long forgotten, is that if you're playing the game, it's because you've already been found. And this is the meaning of the incarnation. In Christ, we are found. So we come to our closing prayer today. It's a poem titled Dark Grace. There is a dark grace upon me, pouring itself like starlight, piercing the wide ribbon of night, enveloping my soul like a womb, suffocating, giving birth to the agony of a spirit unshackled by slavery to him who is freedom. There is a dark grace upon me, a dark and terrible joy, who has no name and hunts with unknown agility, who stalks with the patience of dandelions, until all I know of life is blown to pieces with one breath, cast to the winds like winged seedlings, left with nothing but everything, left with no thing but I am. There is a dark grace upon me. And that brings us to our sharing this morning. So, as always, you have the floor. Hi, Brother Columba. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Father. Good to see you too again. I was really touched by the sentence, we repeatedly attempt to hide from God, all the time secretly longing to be found. And during our afternoon prayer at 12:30 here in my abbey, we read from the meditations of Henry Nouwen, and it said, there are also people who do not see God at all. But do we realize that God is looking for us more than we looking for him? So this gives me to think about a few weeks, I think.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can see it's almost like as we say in English, the flip side of the coin is saying the same. It's the same idea, and that I think is really one of the most beautiful insights of the Christian spiritual life when we really come to the depth of that realization of the divine seeking. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that connection. Erlene, please.
I'd like to go back a couple of weeks when you made a statement. You said that this was your theology. And my interpretation of what you said was that you believe that Christ did not realize his full divinity until his resurrection. Is that what you said, what you meant? That he was human when he was here on earth, he was completely human. And at his resurrection, he knew who he was then.
Yes.
And explain a little bit more, maybe.
Yeah, well, Erlene, you're right. So I want to be clear about saying I'm not suggesting that he was not fully human and fully divine, which is really the Orthodox position around that, right? Which I fully embrace and with great joy. So the real question is around his consciousness of that identity, not the ontology of it, not the being of it. And there are a spectrum of positions within Christianity about when did Jesus know, or what did he know, and when did he know it, kind of thing. And it's my position, and again, it is just mine. It's shared by many, but I don't really know if it's necessarily an official teaching. I don't think there is an official teaching on this topic. But it is my position that I feel that what makes most sense is that it's in his resurrection that he really came to the fullness of his identity of who he was. And that's an important thing for me precisely because it takes his humanity with all the limitations of humanity very seriously. And so it says to me that when he was, for example, suffering and hanging on the cross and asking, God, why have you forsaken me? There's a lot of ways that is interpreted in terms of his citing of a psalm and what it implies. But I think part of what it implies is he was asking a genuine question. I mean, he was terrified. And what's important to me about that is when I ask, where are you? And don't get a response, I know that don't get what appears to be a response, right? There's a sense in which I know that Christ understands what it means to be calling out to heaven and hearing nothing but what appears to be silence. Or that he approached his death with the same trepidation that we do on some level. And that in the reality of the resurrection, it becomes not something that maybe we would say is an absolute surprise, but the completion of an intuition, something that had been developing in him since childhood. There's a beautiful line that talks about Jesus growing in wisdom throughout his life. Early in Luke's gospel, we see that he grew in wisdom. And so what is that wisdom? That, to me, that's, at least in part, the self-knowledge or the self-awareness of his unique identity around God. But to presume that a human being could really know that for certain and still have a human experience feels a little counterintuitive, because you and I don't get that insight necessarily. So that's sort of what I'm trying to get at, if that helps you. And by all means, if you further ask you.
Yes, it does. It changed my thinking completely. I have always questioned, how can he be human and divine at the same time? And for me, so to speak, that he's gone through all he has experienced all that we will experience. That makes me, if I agree that he was divine, but he was human, and he had human experiences, just like I do.
Right.
And I'm just so glad that you made that comment. It just makes me feel like that I have so much more hope that there is a possibility that I can, because I feel like that we are supposed to be more like Christ every day. And it makes me feel like, well, I can reach a certain stage of being like Christ. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And I think it also would support a kind of modeling of our own self-identity, which would invite us into meditation on the fact that perhaps it's even in our own death that we too come to the full realization of the beauty of who we are, and that life becomes a kind of, one would hope, a movement toward that ultimate truth. But I love, Paul's notion, now we see as through a glass darkly, but then we see face to face. There's a sense to which he acknowledges in that beautiful reflection, now we are known only in part, but then we shall know fully. There's a degree to which life is like an unfolding of that flowering. And in death, we come to the deepest, truest realization of what we've intuited all along, but have sometimes, not been able to see with full clarity, right? So there's something in Christ's own life, death, and resurrection that becomes the model for our own experience, and that we can trust ours will sort of model or follow after his own. Yeah. Okay. Robin, hi, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And thank you for this. I was following along and happy to be feeling like I was getting it until the last 3 sentences. And I was hoping you would flesh them out for me, because I'm very close.
Sure. Let me just then call up the reading and see so that we can all have it, for those who don't have the book in front of them. Okay, so starting about here.
What mystics? Yes.
Okay, so what mystics have always known, even if some in the church have too long forgotten, is that if you're playing the game, it's because you've already been found. And this is the meaning of the incarnation. In Christ we are found. So I'm building here on the sort of anecdotal story that I just told about my nephew and I playing hide and seek. And just as in his innocence, he believed at the time he was hiding. He's 20 years old now, by the way, so we don't play this game anymore. but he believed that he was literally standing behind a floor lamp and that we couldn't see him. This was what was absolutely endearing about this whole experience, right? And he would cover his eyes thinking that, well, if I can't see them, they're not able to see me. I'm sure many of you have had experiences like this with children. That is, you just want to eat them up because you realize it's so innocent. And I think that in a sense that provides a kind of parable for the types of dynamics that we see actually unfolding in the contemplative life, where what we really want, like Adam and Eve, is to be found, and yet we hide, right? Out of fear of our nakedness. If we go back to that story, it's God who is in search of Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve in search of God. And that, to me, becomes the great reversal of Christian thinking around Revelation, right? That Revelation is not about humanity in search of God, but God in search of humanity. And if we don't know that, if we can't experience or encounter that, it's because we're in hiding. But the places we hide are as conspicuous as those of my little nephew, which to God are just, we are hiding in plain sight. And the hiding is only from our side. And so there is already a relationship of love and trust and even playfulness between my nephew and I that allows the game to even go on, right? It's already, the game already assumes the relationship is there between me and him. In fact, he is hiding from me, right? Or attempting to. And I think that what I'm suggesting here is likewise in the contemplative life. If you've begun your search for God, or what feels to you like a search for God, and the hide and seek that goes on in that process of, oh, now I'm dedicated to my meditation and now I'm stepping away from it, or, you know, now I'm living into my true self and now there goes my ego again to protect me, or so forth, that very dynamic is already born of the grace of having known on some deep level that there is a God to search for, that there is, that's already. If there wasn't such thing as revelation, we wouldn't even know to search for a God. There wouldn't even be a sense of that, right? So the fact is, the game presumes an already established relationship between you and God, in which, in a sense, from the point of view of the divine, you're already found. God already knows where you are. God is already in search of you. And if you find yourself playing that contemplative game of hide and seek, it's premised already on the faith in a God who in some way you're already in relationship with. And that is, I think, itself grace.
And then jump to the meaning of the incarnation.
So the meaning of the incarnation, so the incarnation, of course, referring to the birth of God in Christ, or in Jesus, as we say. That the core revelation that I think we are to take from the birth of Christ, the life of Christ, the death and resurrection of Christ, is that we are found. That God in Jesus entered into human history and found us, right? Raised us up, lifted us up in that. So in a sense, the mythical drama that unfolds in the Garden of Eden, where we are originally walking intimately with God, we then abandon that, we fall into the illusion of separation. The incarnation is God's amelioration of that illusion. God saying, I have found you now, right? And so it's not just told in another myth, but the myth is ameliorated in history, in a physical embrace, not just a theoretical one.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So Linda, hi, good morning. I'm so glad your camera's working finally.
It means I had to put my lipstick on. Mystics wear lipstick, right?
Right, that's right.
Yeah, this idea that Jesus didn't realize his divinity until resurrection is very disturbing to me, and I don't want to believe it. It feels like that would be that God would. That's not very nice of God. Also, like, didn't Jesus? I mean, he knew about his birth. Didn't Mom tell him all about his birth story and his miracles, his prophesies, that he would be dying in Jerusalem. Nobody comes to God but through me. These things that all feel like self-awareness, and it doesn't, to me, preclude full human experience. Fully divine, fully human. Those don't feel like any contradiction to me. So I don't like this idea. I don't like your theology. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, this idea that God finds us flies in the face of my feeling that it's not an issue of God finding us, because God has always been with us, and maybe it's just words, but that God, there's something that doesn't work for me about God finding us. That's it.
Good, Linda, thank you. So let me sort of again say that there really is a spectrum of sort of positions on this that many Christians hold. Everything from, the moment he was born, he as an infant knew that he was, say, Lord God, King of the universe, maker of the stars and galaxies. And there's that position, right, which would probably be the opposite end of what I'm suggesting, but it's there and people would hold that. And remember,
I'm sorry, what was the opposite you said?
Well, in other words, that like from his infancy, he would have had consciousness of being fully God, meaning that I am the creator of the stars of the heavens and the galaxies, that there would have been that real consciousness of himself as fully divine, right? And that position is held by Christians. Again, I don't think there is any official teaching from any church that I'm aware of that actually concludes with any kind of definitive sense when we should believe that Jesus was self-aware of himself as fully divine. Skillebex, who wrote of 2 volumes, one called Jesus and the other called Christ, explores this what seems to be a unique experience in Jesus, in what he calls his Abba experience. And for us, for to have Jesus call God Abba has become very natural for Christians to understand, but one has to realize that for him to do that in his ancient, Jewish context would have been seen as profoundly disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
You don't approach the Queen of England and say, "Hey, babe, how you doing?" You don't have that kind of intimacy or informality is just scandalous and against all kinds of protocols. So when Israel refers to God as Lord God, King of the universe, you don't say, "Hey, Dad, how are you doing?" and talk openly about that. That is just off limits, right? So what Skillebeck talks about is how he uses that idea to say that tells us something about the interior life of Jesus, that he really did experience some sort of intimacy, intuition and intimacy. He doesn't go full of saying that Jesus would have necessarily been fully aware of the implications of that, but that there was what we would call a kind of mysticism where he had some real direct intuitive sense of his intimacy with God, and it comes out through this Abba experience. So I just put that out there. So you are, I want to, where there is a legitimate range, I want people to feel free to embrace those. That is talking about the consciousness of Jesus in terms of what he might or might not have known in the course of a human lifetime is not at all to suggest he wasn't fully human and divine. And I want to make clear that I'm not suggesting that. The other thing about, your question around the Gospels, they are, first of all, fantastic, insightful questions. And in the time that we have this morning, it would literally be opening a Pandora's box, and I would leave you more confused and baffled, I think. But I will just try to, in a very quick way, summarize this. As a quick notation, this year I'm starting a 10-month series in critical studies of the Gospels. And that will be an online self-paced thing, wherein your questions get addressed. It's going to take me the better part of a year to address those questions. But in many cases, to put it as simply as I can, what we know now is that a lot of the reflections and insights you refer to are not necessarily things Jesus said or felt, but things that the gospel writers said Jesus said or felt 30, 60 years later for very clear theological reasons that in which they're trying to express something truthful about who Jesus was, but often do so by putting words on his lips and so forth that reflect more the theology of the evangelist, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, than necessarily Jesus himself. to say more would become very thorny. But what we have are theological portraits, literary portraits of Christ, because they're interested not merely in giving you, say, an external snapshot of who Jesus was, say a biography or a CV, a resume, but what they're trying to do is to help their particular audience know something about who Christ was, not just, let me rephrase that. They're trying to get their audience to know Christ, to really know and be in relationship with Christ, not merely know about Christ. But I think if you were, for example, were to walk through that course, you would see some of the nuances of what I'm trying to spell out.
Okay, I have 25 questions, but I'll save them for next year.
Yeah,
yeah, the one thing I'm sorry, the one thing I just also wanted to say, this is not my question. I mean, I'm wondering if, you know, how humans come to, as we grow as toddlers, you know, there's these stages of subjective, objective awareness, self-reflection, that you understand that pen over there is separate from you, that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering, you know, some pretty amazing stuff happened at age 12 in the temple. Anyway, I'm going to have to sit on this because it feels like it has huge implications. Maybe it doesn't. And then the final thing is, I loved your poem. And I don't know, I want to give other people a chance to speak, but this concept of dark grace, you use the word agony. And I suppose it's related to the longing and the finding. But I just was curious where you were when you wrote that.
I wrote that in the year 2000. So this is what, 21 years ago now, almost. That I was almost, you know, not quite half, a little less than half my age now. And I think I was going through a bit of a dark night, if you want to say, and that kind of just came out of that experience of trying to express something of that.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Yeah, and let me just say it in conclusion, you're probably right that a lot of what you were touching upon here in both your questions and my attempt to respond briefly is indeed probably has big implications, but I don't think they're necessarily shattering. No. And I do want to make sure that, you know, I don't want anybody here to feel required to accept a kind of theological proposition that isn't modeling for you how your relationship with God is. And there, as much in theology, there's always quite a legitimate range of ways of seeing things, and each one of those probably offers something important to the larger conversation. So it's okay if we feel challenged, but I don't want you to feel in any way threatened or disturbed, put it that way. Right.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's shocking from an intellectual theological perspective, but from deification, being God, etc., it doesn't matter. Does it make me kinder to my neighbor?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's okay, and that's well said. And there's the real litmus test, right? Is how are we loving you? Exactly. All right. Well, thank you. Christine, please. Good to see you.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that struck me as you told this delightful story of your nephew is that he could also be a picture of the God who hides in plain sight and says, here I am, either in a delightful way or in a comforting way. Right. And so to me, that's the mirror image of what you're saying about us as the infant and God as that infant. This other thing I wonder if you might explore with us,
sure,
as you can, but I'm wondering about the I am statements of Christ that I think, as you have already stated, was how the author of the gospel wanted us to understand Jesus, but how we in our spiritual life live into that, as in our baptismal vows, and through that rite, we realize that it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, and then how we live into the I amness of that.
Okay, Christine. So so first of all, I understand your sort of premise around the gospel writer John really using the I am or the ego eimi statements, right? But I'm not sure if I follow what the question then is based on that in terms of how it relates to us. I think I missed the question.
So how do we live into that realization as well, as it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me? And so as we get closer and closer to our truer self, we too have that realization that I can be the bread of life for others. I can be. All of the I am statements that Jesus said, only by being a clear vessel for his light and love.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're touching upon would be, for me on some level, the thread that I'm carrying throughout the whole book, right? Because that is the question: how do we first come to the awareness, even if that's merely a theoretical or intellectual awareness of what I think are the deepest implications of Christian faith, deification, which is what we're exploring, the idea that in God becoming human, we have been made divine. But then comes the various ways in which we have been, the tools, if you want to say, that the tradition gives us to achieve what is beyond merely an intellectual awareness of the concept or appreciation of the concept, to a growing lived or embodied reality that I am, because Christ is more interior to me than I am to myself, to use Augustine's idea. And that, so the how-to, I think, is normally attributed to, well, you have your contemplative practice and you practice asceticism, and there's a lot of things that we do to try to remove obstacles, which is the most important piece, right? To come out from hiding behind that lamp and that curtain. And part of that is to first be aware that I am indeed trying to hide behind certain things, right? Meister Eckhart supposedly has said that, spirituality is more about subtraction than addition. I'm sure you've heard that, and many of you have. So how do we remove those obstacles that blind us to seeing that indeed we are an extension of Christ in the world, a branch on that vine? This is the big question. And while I think that for a time, and maybe a long time, mostly, maybe even for most of us, a lifetime, finding the kind of practices by which we continue to train the mind to descend into the heart, continue to look with great truthfulness at the obstacles and the so-called demons we'll talk about in chapter 4, are the practices we put in place to deepen to really move into that capacity to see beyond what most of the time we're blinded from. But I also think that at some point, what we start to experience is the need to put those practices down and just love. And so, like anything else, we could become so rigid about practice that then eventually becomes the thing that starts getting in the way of being love in this given moment. And Meister Eckhart speaks beautifully about that, and we'll come to that in his exegesis of the Mary Martha pericope, and really extols Martha, the one who's busy in the kitchen, as the real mature contemplative, because she knows when to put the practice down, to detach from even the practice in order to serve Christ in her midst and just continue to love. And that is really, I think, the ultimate aim, is to be a constant flow of that divine love. And that requires real practice, but then at some point, the practices can start to get in the way, and we just have to sense when that's happening enough to just say, oh, I'm irritated with this person for interrupting my meditation, when really what this moment calls for is for me to love that person who has a need right now. And that's not an abandonment of my practice, that's an expansion of that, right? And that, again, is a skilled thing we have to learn, and we're going to do it sometimes better than others, but that's, I think, that is what feels to me like kind of the trajectory.
Thank you.
I suspect much of that you've already intuited, yes? Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it. And I think, to that point, I want to then just say, while it's sort of fresh in your mind, what the beauty behind that development is also to assure you that what you experience in your meditation is all but irrelevant. right? It's not about ecstatic, blissful experiences. And those of you who've been meditating for a lifetime and experienced nothing but dry desolation, boredom, that's a beautiful thing, because there's a purity in your intention there. And all that matters is that not what happens in the prayer, but in a sense of who you become because of it. So just don't be discouraged if you find your prayer life mostly boring. That's okay. All right. Sharon May, please. Morning.
Morning, Father. Well, I've been in a dark night for the last 12 hours or so. And so this whole metaphor of dark grace is something that I really appreciate this morning, because I think of grace as always being light, and,
Right.
there's something about a dark grace that is very consoling to me right now. And I realize from your story was very curative to me. I had a little boy, he's my only child, and this game of hide and seek was my first glimpse at what I'm going to call positive masculinity in him that I saw in this little boy. And it was the first time I ever saw anything like that before. The energy of the positive aspects of, that we equate with masculinity, and how I think part of my dark night is being overwhelmed with the opposite of that, that's being played out not only on the world stage, but personally in my own life, it seems, and other people I'm speaking to. It's like we're having a real struggle with that right now. So that image of that little boy brought me back down to that place where I saw the very first glimpse of what a good role model of that looks like. And then I also glommed onto Father Thomas Keating as the adult, mature version of that. Like, I see that I desperately needed such good role models, and that myself and God together gifted me with those, because I wasn't going to get them anywhere else. I had to help, find my own. And thank God I had these gifts, the gift of my son and the gift of Father Keating, the gift of spiritual teachers like you. I've been always curious why I've been drawn to more masculine spiritual teachers. And I think it's because I really needed that divine role model of how it looks when it's healthy. And so I want to, number one, I just want to thank you for being one of those role models for me, and for bringing from the beginning to the end to really help me to see that my child brought that to me and showed me the first glimpse of it, and how I can, for him, he is my role model and my teacher in that regard. And it's just so beautiful. So I wanted to say that. And then I wanted to also comment on this joy of this game of hide and seek, because I had a reversal of what you wrote here in my own experience, which is that God is the one who lets out an impatient sigh when I'm, and who finally makes a noise so that I can catch a glimpse of God. Because I'm so dense at the moment that, he's got to he actually sighs and jumps out and says, "Here I am." And then I go, "Oh, how could I forget? How could I have not known?" So it's a reciprocal longing. God is longing to play. It's a game and it's a play. And I totally get that God has just been playing with me, hide and seek, my whole life, and that it's just as much fun for him as it is for me. So
that's a beautiful reflection.
Yeah. Thank you. I just had to speak it out loud. Sorry if I took up too much time with my own, I don't have a question, but if I didn't say it out loud, I just want to hold on to this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Yeah, that's really a really beautiful reflection. And I appreciate in the first sort of reflection about the positive masculinity, recently saw a profoundly beautiful documentary called My Octopus Teacher. And if you haven't seen it yet, you just absolutely have to see it. It's breathtakingly beautiful. You wouldn't think a documentary about an octopus would be interesting, but it is. You like hang on to every second of this film. And it's about a man, I believe he's Australian, and he's a diver, and he has this relationship for a year with this octopus. She's a female, and he visits her every single day. And the filming he did around this was fantastic. And I don't even know how he did it. But he follows her for a year, and they develop this most tender, beautiful relationship. I had no idea how smart an octopus could be. But one of the things that strikes me is at the end, how he is so in love with this kelp forest and preserving it and seeing the beauty and the fragility of it. And he brings his young son into the whole experience. And he reflects on his son who is now maturing. He's probably a young teenager. And he teaches him to respect and love nature, but he says, but most of all, to be gentle. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, because this dad was himself such a gentle man. He just had such a beautiful, tender spirit and such a model for masculinity, as you're saying. And the way he passed that to his son, and what he valued most in his son was his gentleness. And passing on that gentleness with nature, gentleness, going in and respecting this environment. And I thought, wow, there's such a beauty there between those, the father and the son, and this beautiful octopus. So if you haven't seen it, it is truly a meditation worth spending time with.
And so I'm sorry, can I quickly add that the man was very, very depressed in a dark night. And that was the evolution of the year. That he came, I just thought that was his.
This octopus really brought him and gave him purpose for that period, for sure. You're right, Linda. I forgot about that piece of it. But yeah, so, yes, I think you are also right. Like so many theological models, it's often a both and I really think your experience of God being the one to finally say, like I'm here, like, in many ways, one could say that's the incarnation, God sort of punching his presence into the universe and saying, here I am. How much longer do you have to? So it's a beautiful reciprocal reflection, and I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Okay, and Ruth, please.
I tend to get stage fright when I talk on this venue.
I know.
I want to I want to go to the hide and seek game just from the perspective of my spiritual experience. My search in the milieu of Southern mainstream Christianity, my search just kind of had to be God-led because there weren't very many people to lead. And when I was in my 20s, I stumbled into hiking as a meditative practice. Mm-hmm. And the harder, the more demanding, the better it was, because when I was hiking 2 miles up, rock scramble the whole way, you've got a marked path. You can get there, but you can't get there unless you're fully focused. And so I didn't think about what I was going to cook for dinner, or how angry I was at my boss, or how much difficulty my kids were giving me. I focused on the climb. And from that perspective, it wasn't uncommon for my awareness of my connection to open up. And because that was my social milieu, we hiked and we played volleyball, that's what we did. I couldn't hide from it because my friends would say, let's go hike. And that was my social milieu. So, but I was always the one who pushed for the harder hikes, the more demanding, the ones that asked for more focus. Now, let's just kind of jump forward 40 to 45 years. The paths are still marked. I don't trust my body to get there anymore. So I don't have that gift of not being able to hide from it. I don't have the gift that that particular demanding practice gave me. And I recently told a friend, I do my practices. I do my sits every day. Sometimes I show up for them. And I've got the tools. I've done this for long enough. I know what the tools are. And I know when I don't use them, I'm hiding. And sometimes I can pretend I'm not hiding for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But it always comes back. And you gave me some good points when you answered Christine's question, because there were pieces. But when I saw your book, this particular section was the place where I said, wow, this could be a companion and possibly a guide. But this hiding, knowing you're doing it and being powerless to stay the course, that's what is the pain of the longing, is just, and not knowing how to get past that.
Wow. So, that is a beautiful reflection in itself. I don't know how much I can add to it. I loved your sort of insight that you meditate every day and sometimes you show up for it. I mean, I saw a lot of heads nodding, and I felt even within myself like, oh yeah, that's what that is, right? There is that experience I think many of us have. And like you said, we do know it intuitively, right? We do know when we're holding the idea of how the path, though carved but requiring a lot of focus, is the thing that almost helps prevent all those other distractions and sort of things. The playground of your mind sort of has to say, nope, I've really got to focus on this, is also a beautiful analogy. Maybe not unlike Jesus saying, the path is narrow, right? And so forth. But I can't but affirm your reflection as very close to my own experience as well. And I think probably for many of us, I think there are moments when, much to my surprise, something happens, we might say, whereby there is just an unworked for, I don't want to say undeserved, that gives the wrong impression, but for no particular reason, I just have a moment of prayer that is particularly grace-filled or peaceful or calm or expansive or so forth. That to me, at the end of those moments, I understand in my own mind, well, that sense of calm and peace was a beautiful gift for a host of reasons, but one that I know I can't simply replicate by willing it the following meditation. Yeah. And so you just have to remain open to that. But your analogies are really quite beautiful. And I just want to encourage you, Ruth, to stay the course, and to forgive yourself when you're there, but not showing up. But this is a common experience. The approach is then to say, oh, guess what? I've been here for 3 days and haven't showed up yet. Okay. And then you can bring yourself back to that intentionality. And that to me is the most helpful way forward. You can't change the fact that what happened 3 days ago. My instruction to my students is always, the only bad meditation is the one you skip. And that, I think, is just, even if you do it and it becomes pro forma and you through that have learned that you're not really showing up, that in itself becomes a learned skill which you can become more intentional around. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you, and thank you for the book. Your book, all the reading I do, your book is the first one that has really touched on how hard this is and how painful that awareness of chronic hiding is. And it's just, for me, it was just a breath of fresh air. because it's nice to have companions.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, and trust me, it's very autobiographical. So it's born of my own experience of recognizing how hard it is. There are times like there will be these spiritual leaders and like, oh, wasn't that peaceful? You know, after a meditation, and oh, I felt so light. I'm like, really? That sucked. I was bored. I was distracted. I couldn't think of any, right? I'm like, what are you people getting that I'm missing? But then, you know, so then there were other times when I'm like, oh, okay, I get this, you know, but I can't will that personally. And I've realized that it's in the commitment, despite the experience, that is in itself transformational. There's a beauty there. And I think it's important that we can share that with one another when it in fact is the case.
Thank you.
Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure I even have a well-formulated question, but I thought I'd just go for it. I keep coming back to Thomas Keating's book on the human condition and how this relates to your description of our illusion of separation from God. And I'm wondering about just this idea that we actually really need to be actively searching for God to sort of become aware of the hide and seek game and our longing, because my sense, again, it's not well formulated, but was just, there are a lot of people that aren't consciously searching for God. And yet my sense is that they are unconsciously searching for God, just in all of the wrong places, sort of how I think Thomas Keating was describing in his book, The Human Condition, where we're filling ourselves up. And you talk about that in here with religion or food or a belief system or sex or drugs or whatever. So what am I really asking? I guess, what about, does everyone have that? Is God giving everyone that grace of that sort of, I mean, is that what the sort of the great cry maybe is for, you know, that we all are suffering when we're not grounding ourselves in the spirit, and yet we don't always know why we're suffering. I'm not sure how to make sense of it. I guess, haven't we all been searching for God, but maybe we haven't come to that awareness? Mm-hmm. So sorry, I'm trying to understand about not just those of us that are intentionally on the path, but maybe other folks who don't know about the path, or who know they're searching for something, if that makes sense, but don't know it's God. Yeah, no, I think through the midst of that, I think I get the terrain of where you're trying to go. And if I'm wrong, please let me know. So I think it is, I think that, I think I said somewhere in the book, or I've said at some point in my life, to be human is to long. Mm-hmm. Longing is a part of human. In other words, and one might phrase that more negatively as there is a perpetual sense of dissatisfaction, or there is a sense of wanting more, or striving for more, or a sense of being incomplete. And one could phrase this in a lot of ways, but I think longing speaks to it as not necessarily in a negative sense of like there's a deficiency, but that there is this sense of desire for fulfillment in a way that doesn't always feel real, or something that has been fully achieved. We have glimpses of it perhaps, but there's still that. And so in many ways, I think our religious and spiritual traditions are responses to that universal human longing, various ways. And there are many responses to it that are not necessarily religious in orientation, philosophical, materialistic. I mean, one could name a bunch of things and we could suspend judgment on whether they're good or bad or healthy or not, or grounded or not, but they're there. And that sense of longing, I think, is pursued in various ways that I would not want to privilege necessarily, say, Christianity or even religion as being somehow
the only way, or that, oh, those poor people who haven't found, Buddha or Christ or Allah, whatever, are just deluded and lost, right? So I want to avoid all of those more myopic ways of thinking that unfortunately has defined a lot of religious history. I think one of the draws for me around Christianity is its beauty. And I know that we'll talk about beauty in a later chapter and its subjectivity. Beauty is very subjective. And so I know clearly that I'm speaking subjectively, but I think the question around why commit to this particular philosophy or that religion or this spiritual practice is ultimately born of a sense of our attraction to it, our sense of it as beautiful. And in my own very limited subjective experience, there isn't anything more beautiful than the incarnation if it's really, really understood in all of its implications, as at least I think I understand it. And so, but what I search for maybe is expressed in that beautiful Shakespearean sense of a rose by any other name smells as sweet. So what you and I potentially are naming Christ is striving for that unnameable reality that has been manifest or revealed in this beautiful sense of incarnation. But when I see other people searching, I sense that they're after that same thing that feels nameless that I happen to name Christ for reasons, that are probably obvious to most of you by now. But I also think that not only out there, but within myself, my own longing can get confused with lesser satisfactions, right? That obscure what it is I'm really longing for. And hence that list of so-called vices, right, that you enumerated. So I've said this before, but I think he's onto something that St. Ignatius Loyola says. He uses not longing, but the word desire. And I think he's referring to the same concept or experience, that what he always would ask, what is your desire beneath your desire? And I think this is a profoundly important question, because it helps all of us understand that when we desire one thing or another, is it not really that deep desire of what we're calling Christ that we are after, that we're desiring? And as you said, searching us not necessarily in all the right places for it, that idea, right? That beautiful analogy that Keating gives at the beginning of his little pamphlet on the human condition, where the little monk is searching for his key in the front yard, and his disciples help him, and they say, well, where did you leave it last? And he says, well, inside. And he says, well, why are we looking for it outside? And the monk says, because there's more light out here, right? So there's a sense in which the house becomes you, and it's right. So indeed, that's what Ignatius is talking about, searching outside of ourselves for what can only really be found within. This is a human condition. And I think Keating was right to point it out. For me, nothing responds better to that sense of beauty of what it means to search and to find than the narrative, the story, the history of the incarnation. But I am also aware that if you want to engage in a beautiful interreligious conversation that is not around conflict or proving right and wrong, ask your Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Taoist neighbor, what is it you find so beautiful about your tradition that you are willing to give your life to it? And then sit back and listen to what you hear. And you will find it profoundly beautiful, and you will no doubt resonate on some level. If you could remove the particulars of the language, you would say, yep, that pretty much speaks for my experience too. So I also think that the lights outside are so bright that by and large, people are easily duped into not even knowing to search within. And this is part of what I think our issues are in our world, and have always been, really. To go back to Ruth's idea, that path is rocky and slippery and difficult and requires a lot of focus. And some people just want to not have to work that hard, right? I don't know if that helps, Jennifer.
Yeah, it helps a lot. Thank you. I think I don't know, I'm feeling fuzzy around. I love the idea that the fact that we're even like aware of the game suggests, we already have this relationship with God. We already have a taste of God. So I wanted to know about, and not in a way that I'm condemning other people, but just I know there's, so many people that not that they're choosing to not be sort of looking for God. They don't even know that that's an option, I guess. Does that make sense? Like they're not even, I don't know. For me, the Thomas Keating book was like an epiphany. Like it just changed my life. So
Right.
I wish everybody could have that experience. And I'm sure they have it in different ways. So I have to be careful.
No, I know, because you on one hand, I think you're touching on something that feels nebulous, which is like there is this complete dissatisfaction and a sort of going after materialism in all these places that we're starting to see within our own selves really are hiding places, conspicuous though they may be, and asking, well, what's in it for them? And without wanting it to sound like, oh, I'm all enlightened and illustrious now, right? And I totally get it. But there is also that observation. I think we can see within ourselves, however, a real identification with the world of why there is that draw. And in its best sense, I think that is partly what's been behind Christianity's missionary zeal, despite what a disaster that has been at times in our history. There is this sense of wanting with all good intention to open that joy to other people. And we've botched that miserably. But I do think in its pure sense, there is that desire to say, wow, I found this beautiful thing. This pearl of great price, as Christ puts it.
Thank you.
I saw a little bit of chatter about, I think it was Steve and Kathy, right? Were you guys trying to jump in line?
Yes, I have been, and I apparently don't have the protocol figured out how to do that without interrupting. I just want to say that I feel a great amount of pain around the issue of longing in the light of the events of the last week at the Capitol. And I just want to say that also I'm in the state of Iowa, and we have people here. I think it's also extremely bothersome when, and I don't mind people having different ideological positions on political philosophy, conservative and liberal, whatever you want to say. But it's very, very troublesome when there seems to be an inability of many of our politicians to discern what is very destructive to our common good as a community of people. And I don't know how to listen to some people on these fringes. I've been practicing centered prayer for a long, long time. I can go into I can do my little thing in my chamber. But I think a lot of this conversation is troublesome to me because it's not dealing with some very scary things happening in our national life. And whether it's religious leaders, whether it's politicians, it's just extremely troublesome. Yesterday, we were having our centering prayer group, and we were reading from John Donahue about longing. And yes, longing and desire is probably the root of what calls us to something bigger than ourselves. But when people can't get to that point, and I'd have to say that whether it was Hitler or other folks that have risen up, the Joe McCarthy's, these things are extremely demonic and cannot be solved by a theological position. People have to rise up and say, no, no, no. And I just feel an extreme amount of pain around this issue of longing and desire when I see it in this. I don't know what label you want to put on the actions or the people, but I just have to say that.
Well, thank you, Steve. Yeah, you really point on the elephant in the room. I mean, I think all of us have been disturbed. I know I have by the events that took place this Epiphany, January 6th. It was as just utterly shocking to me. The mayhem and the violence and the murder, it's just crazy. And I unfortunately, not being a political analyst, I'm probably very limited in what I can say, but I think that your insights are spot on. there are some, I've heard people say, well, now we live in a post-truth world, but we don't live in a post-truth world. There are indeed facts. It's just a matter of how they're being twisted or maligned or turned or communicated in ways that are just completely like off the charts crazy. And there are so many features that have to do with politics and technology and new forms of manipulation by foreign regimes using, as we know, technology to shape people's public opinion and to create mayhem. These are dangerous, dangerous weapons, and I don't think we have a clue yet as to their how venomous they can be. But I think we're beginning to see how, I've heard people argue, well, 30% of the people in the United States believe that the elections were fraudulent, and that's a position that has to be allowed to be part of the conversation. And my thought is, no, it is completely fabricated. And every section of our government that has legitimate authority has confirmed and reconfirmed over and over again. You have to meet that kind of delusional thinking with facts and with truth, not engage it as if it's a real intellectual partner that deserves its day at the table. It doesn't. It just doesn't. And this is where, as we move into these terrifying new realities of how through these social media, entire populations are being manipulated by rogue governments. How we're moving now into a whole new world of technology called deep fakes, by which anyone can be made to appear as though they've said anything or done anything. And you can have a political figure and put them in a film and make it look like they've done anything. And it's getting more and more difficult. It's used more or less in movie theaters, right? But it's becoming now co-opted for political means to destroy and smear a person's reputation. Because if you see a video clip with some politician you hate doing something egregious, and even though they can tell you it's a deep fake, if you've got a third of the population insisting it's not a deep fake, it's real. Well, oh my God, what are we going to do with that, right? It's on film. The person looks and sounds like they said and did it.
And what really flipped me today was on NPR talking about women who hate, the women who stand with the men who are, I'm going to call them terrorists at this point. I don't know what other word to put, but I'm not going to call them protesters. Anyhow, that just flipped it for me, and it's really tough. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's understandable. I know, and this is where, let me just say that our capacity to be able to step back from that circus of modern life and to really discern interiorly is going to be more paramount, more important than ever. Because the idea, look, every news station has a spin. We have to be able to take a step back and to discern for ourselves, to take in enough information to have something to work with, but not to be so sort of enraptured by any particular narrative that we can't separate it anymore from our own sense of what's true and what's not, what's right. So the contemplative life is going to mean something different as we move into this disturbing new reality of how technology and foreign governments are able to manipulate and so forth, moving forward. It's a very scary time, and I don't think it's to be taken lightly. And I think what we saw happen at the US nation's capital this week is a harbinger of things to come. And it's a very difficult thing to assess. But I appreciate it. I don't think it's an irrelevant question.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, of course. Okay, so I'll tell you what, I have Mary and then Linda and Pat. And then from there, we'll go to looking at our practice, and I'll give our practice for this coming week. Okay, Will, take good care. God bless you. Okay, Mary, please go right ahead.
I just want to go back to your explanation about longing. I really, really appreciated the thoroughness of the understanding of longing. I have never heard such a complete explanation or whatever, a talk about longing. And it made, for myself, I think that I've never understood gratitude, and I've never really understood peacefulness, because when people have talked about those qualities, I have often thought that they cancel out longing. And so today was the first day that I could integrate those different qualities, that they can be together. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciated that.
Oh, thanks, Mary. Yeah, that's very beautiful. And, to kind of affirm that, there's a kind of pervasive sense within spiritual or mystical literature in which paradoxically, as you, to use the term, advance in the spiritual life, the longing doesn't diminish but intensifies. Because, and so living into the moment is actually an intensification of the longing, until some of the mystics would say it actually becomes this simultaneous experience of absolute pain and joy at the same time. And that is born, many of the mystics will tell you, of the realization, on the one hand, that I am loved infinitely and beyond measure, but as a finite being, I cannot love as fully in return. That's the pain. I know I'm loved, there's the joy. I experience this sense of being loved infinitely, utter bliss. And then at the same moment, but I can't love the same. It's like I'm only this little cup of water, and here's the ocean. How could I compete, right? How could I respond with an equal amount of water when I'm just a little tiny cup? And that creates pain, because there's a desire to want to love as much in return, and realizing that we are in a sense completely impoverished, that everything we have comes from that great, beautiful, divine ocean of love and mercy, and all we can do is receive it. And so there's this beautiful sense in which the longing does become the experience in the present moment, not necessarily something that would distract from being fully present. So I think you're on the right path there, and it's a beautiful insight. All right. I think Linda was next, and then we'll close with Pat.
Just briefly, I think Steve brings up a huge issue for we contemplatives. I put in a chat that I sent you, I was about to send all of you an email or 2 days ago, just about this topic, and wanted your counsel and guidance. I feel like this is the whole point of Vincent's book, this idea of contemplative discipleship, of living in the world. I had an experience every morning when I wake up. I should first say I was on a phone with many, many friends, and found myself getting riled up about it in so many ways, and felt this kind of self-righteousness and then went to bed. And the next day I woke up, I always say hello to Jesus and kind of see him at the bottom of my bed and ask him for help for the day. And that morning he threw a book at me. He threw Vincent's book at me. Literally, I mean, I have a vivid imagination, but I then went through, and basically, he was mad at me and for forgetting the whole content. And I think this is a huge issue. I don't want to take a lot of time, but perhaps I'll send my email to the Google group, because I do think it's a vital, vital question for us of how to live in the world with the equanimity and love that we are called to be. What does it mean to understand the insurrectionist in the context of God's love? And to me, the last 2 chapters of Vincent's book are totally about that. So I would love to open that up for further discussion.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, the 4th chapter in particular really is an attempt to really look at what the tradition would have called our demons. And because we're reading it so slowly, it's probably going to be a little bit of an elongated period on sort of the interior darkness, which may feel a little bit hard to take because we're going to drag it out so long. But I do want us, when we get to that chapter, we're just starting the chapter prior, to really be able to immerse ourselves, because it's doing that hard work of really looking at the ways in which we are complicit, and not in a way that should induce shame or a sense of guilt, but awakening to just awareness. And that is always the first step of dealing with any demon, is you name it, right, as we'll learn. So it's going to be a month or two of naming, and yeah, it'll be good to have us all doing that together. So thanks, Linda. Okay, and then finally, Pat, please.
I think my comments have much to do with what Linda just said, and Steve's remarks, which I totally agree with. It's been such a struggle for me this week to just process that. There was so much anger and hatred being displayed this week, and not to fall into responding to the perpetrators of that with the same feeling and attitude. How do I move intellectually believing and knowing that we're all created in the image of God, but getting that from my head to my heart, to see people who are doing and saying things that are egregious and appalling, but still being able to know that they are created in God's image. It's been a real struggle.
Indeed, and thank you for that, because you're very much right, and I do think that's where the mapping out that I talked about earlier of the practices and the engagement and taking those seriously before we simply leapfrog to dropping them and just loving in the moment, is that these practices train us to do and to confront those judgments within us in a way that is helps us to sort of shed the otherizing, the dehumanizing process of feeling disgust by someone or something they've done or an ideology they hold, and instead being able to look beneath that and say, but there is an image and likeness of God just like me, but we are, siblings in Christ, as it were. How do your practices enable you to disengage from the judging, thinking, condemning mind, and just be within the mystery of that love? And that doesn't mean we don't prosecute. It doesn't mean people don't, right? We have to pursue legal means by which we protect society, and that, we justice. But we can, shifting that from doing that out of venom and revenge is a very different thing than doing that because it's somehow what the society needs to do to protect itself and so on. So how do we move into those practices in a way that helps to acknowledge judgment, animosity, resentment in myself, to be able to let go of those as things I'm hiding behind? Because what's really going on is that I feel wounded, I feel hurt, I feel by what I'm seeing and by these actions. And how do I get to that place so that I can open up that well of compassion? That's what our practices in this case could help us to do.
So that brings to mind, I've just been reading Richard Rohr's Universal Christ, and he talks about the crucifixion being viewed as restorative justice rather than retributive justice. And, I sense that's what you're saying as well, that yes, these wrongs, these evils need to be prosecuted, but are we doing it in a restorative way or a punishing, retributive way?
That's right. And I think that means we have to speak truth to the reality, to the power, to the situation. We can't deny it or pretend it didn't happen. But how do we check, if you want to say, or observe within us our own desire for revenge, right, and so forth, and really just move to that place where we can start to feel some compassion. Tomorrow in my sermon, which is the Feast of the Baptism, I'm going to be drawing a correspondence between something that President Trump said just before this whole event unfolded, and something that we hear in the Gospels. And that essentially is, I support you and I love you. This is the voice that comes from heaven, is you are my beloved son, right? In a sense, this is precisely what Trump says to his people before this emboldened act. And part of what I'm grappling with in that reflection or that parallel is this sense that we all need to feel loved, and love commissions us to do things, hopefully transformative and beautiful things. But I think that one of the struggles that people say, like President Trump, have in his own personal life is he doesn't really believe that he's loved. And I don't mean that in a saccharine way. I think he does not understand in any way, shape, or form that he is beloved of God. And the kinds of the vacuum that leaves when it comes to that level is, well, for the world to see, but he's not unique in that either. He just happens to be uniquely in power. But so what does it mean then to commission someone to live their life with the commissioning that you are loved, as the baptism of Christ tells us is what happened, and how in a similar way, I think Trump commissions his own people. And so where is the lovelessness? Where is the experience of being unloved that is behind this? And can we, in that, begin to cultivate a compassion for what is the deep down motivation for these things that we find so offensive? Where is the love loss there? The lack of knowing that. So let me then share screen, and I want to share with you both your practice for this coming week. And then we'll talk about our practice for, we can talk for a few minutes anyway about our practice this past week. So speaking of love, look lovingly upon an obstacle that you hide behind. Gaze on it with the tenderness of a small child. Embrace it, and then gently set it aside. You're allowed to go back to it, even if you choose to do that with monotonous tedium, to draw from this story from today. But for just a moment, I'm asking you to do a meditation where you gaze on that obstacle tenderly, lovingly, embrace it, accept it, then set it aside, and let yourself, in doing so, be exposed to that divine gaze. What happens? Important in this exercise is that you don't feel you have to do it forever. If it's a hiding spot that you feel particularly comfortable with, this doesn't have to be a once for all removal of that. I just want you to step aside. Do you feel that vulnerability? What is that thing you hide behind? Is it your anger? Is it resentment? Is it judgment? Right? Is it some habitual behavior? Is it something that you can say, just for this moment, I'm going to see what happens when I put that aside? And what comes of that? Okay, and with that said then, let's look at last week's practice. Spend the week meditating on something you longed for and eventually acquired. A work of art, a piece of clothing, a new gadget. Notice how fleeting, how empty, and now begin to notice what that emptiness reveals. Can you see in it the divine ruse? That was my question, and it relates to our readings from last week. So I'm going to stop that share, if that's okay, and just see if anybody would like to share openly about that. Mary, please.
this week I was determined to buy a bike. And the reason why I was determined, and I'm not a thing person at all, but I was bound and determined to get the hell out of this isolation and lockdown in a way that felt safe. So I pursued it with every ounce of energy that I had this week to get a bike. And then someone said to me, well, you can get a stand and you can actually have the bike in your house, which I never knew. So I got the stand, and now I have a bike and a stand in my house. And I don't feel overly satisfied. I don't feel that it accomplished this need to be out in the world again, free from disease. But it has given me an avenue for exercise. So that's what I did this week.
Not a bad purchase, especially if it's getting you out exercising. No, thank you. Very great reflection. Debbie, please. There you go.
Well, one thing, my father died in 2005. And one thing I always enjoy is beauty because of the nature outside. And I had bought my first condo I have on my own. And one thing I wanted to put in it, I wanted to make my home like a sanctuary. I love to put in beautiful things. I love to do art, and I like artists' works. So I thought, okay, I'm going to invest in this artist that paints Christ in the light. And I thought in my home, it's going to be a constant reminder, which it is. And I had this art also, because I know art appreciates. It doesn't depreciate if it's a well-known one. So I thought, okay, it's a gift to pass on to my grandchildren or family as an inheritance, and something for them to ponder on the reflection of Christ. And so this art for me, I also too, I must say, I worked at Mark Frost, and I got some artwork when I was leaving by a well-known artist. They said, pick two. Now, the difference is when I look at the art of Christ, this artist that paints Christ, it serves as a reminder, and it's constantly drawing me to think of him. And I love it. I have this one, it's called Lost No More. Lost, how does it go? Lost and found. I'm no longer lost, but found. But that was the idea of the artist. And it's like a meditation. And when I walk by it, like when I'm thinking about things, and actually I almost think that sometimes Jesus smiles at me, or he looks differently. And I'm wondering, okay, so I love this art, but the other artwork, it's just kind of like it's on the outside. It doesn't affect me on the inside or touch me on the inside. The other artwork is like, okay, it's nice. Oh, it's someone famous. I like your colors, but it has no effect on me. It's like an emptiness, right? And the other one serves me as a longing that increases that desire. So I have this, when I looked at it, because it says one thing is art, and I acquired it, but I also noticed one is fleeting and empty, and the other one is more like a vehicle. It's driving me or propelling me. So I thought that was very interesting. And so that's what I want to share.
Thank you, Debbie. That's a beautiful reflection. The ancients would say that might be the difference between an idol and an icon. An idol sort of ends with itself, terminates with itself, or an icon moves us beyond it to what it reveals, like a window to heaven, the Orthodox would say. So perhaps there's that distinction there for you, but thank you for sharing that. That's nice. Okay, we are almost at time, but I see two more hands, so we'll close with those. And I believe it was Pat and then Betty. Did I get that order right? I'm not sure. And so by all means, go ahead and share your thoughts. Pat, you want to start?
Okay. What I was most struck by with this practice was I know throughout my life there have been, numerous things that I longed for, I wanted, I acquired. But now I look back at it, the dissatisfaction was so complete that I can't even remember what those things were. I can't even name them now.
Right. And you know, that in itself is such a great lesson in just really discerning what that, you know, how that longing gets directed towards something, the expectation it builds in its capacity to fulfill or satisfy. And then you're like, wait a minute, I can't remember what that was anymore, right? That
Yeah.
so again, in the contemplative life, it's about just becoming aware of those patterns and acknowledging and noticing them, so that as we move forward, we can launch from that, right? Learn from that and say, oh, what is this desire that feels like it's for a new this or a new that or whatever? What's really behind that? And is that really what I'm after?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Dwight, by the way, the answer to the question is yes, absolutely, of course. Okay, Betty, please. Betty?
I'm trying to unmute.
Okay, and I think I lost track of you, but I'll find you. Go right ahead.
You just remuted, Betty.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, you're unmuted now.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so last June, I decided to buy a new car.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a perfectly adequate Prius, which was 11 years old, but it needed a paint job. And I thought I should just buy a new car. So I bought a new Prius, a 2020 Prius, and I hate it. I hate this car. It is so technologically advanced, I can't work anything in it. And I long for my Prius. And I realized what was going on. I was so isolated during this pandemic. This was my attempt for power and control. And it didn't work out at all. And now I am saddled with a $18,000 loan for a car that I don't like. And all I wish is that I could have my old Prius back.
Oh, yeah, Betty, I'm sorry. I will say this, if there's hope there, as you adjust to the technology, you may start to find it actually will be.
I don't think so.
No. I feel very bad about that because I know the frustration around that. Bit of practical advice: you might have a cooling off period where you could return the car. I'm not sure how long ago you purchased it now, but they do allow that in some states. So if you're under 30 days, I would call them. But I would say this, that you know, the deeper lesson in that is that there is some degree in which that becomes the metaphor for everything we're talking about, right? Yes. The assumption, whether that's an old practice, meditation practice that now feels dull and dry and boring. So this new thing, this new fad, this new way, this new diet, this new exercise program, this is going to be the fix all. And of course it never is, right? Right. That's the thing. So there's a beautiful reflection on digging for sand in the desert, that, you know, at first you're digging and it's just sandy, so it's easy to shovel, but then you start hitting bedrock and it's hard, and you think, well, I'm looking for water and this is just too hard, so I'm going to start digging over there instead. Well, if you keep doing that, you're going to die of thirst because you'll never get deep enough to get to the well. So at some point beyond the easier parts of our practice and of our comes the hard work of hitting bedrock, and at that point the real work begins. But the idea is to keep going deeper rather than look elsewhere, because that's where the water is. It's beneath, right? The idea. So let this be a little parable in your own life that can be a teaching moment rather than one you regret for too much longer. All right. Okay. we are at time, and actually we're a little bit over. So I'm very sorry for that, but I so appreciate your attendance here this morning and for, a very fascinating discussion. I believe next week we begin then chapter 3, which will bring us on to a different topic altogether, although clearly related, where we'll be exploring the prodigal son narrative in light of the incarnation and so on. It's a lovely chapter that will help to spell out some of the implications of this. So I want to wish you all a very blessed week ahead. Stay grounded, stay peaceful, stay supple, check judgment as it rises up in you, animosity, resentment, anger, and let these things dissipate in light of your connection to deep compassion. That's really where it all is going to start. So I wish you all a very blessed, peaceful, and very healthy week ahead. And go with my blessing, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and be at peace. And I look forward to seeing you again next Saturday. All right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.